We are studying through the reigns of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon this summer in our preaching series called Kingly, From Saul to Solomon. My goal, I should rather say my goals in this entire series will be a bit bothersome and annoying, which is kind of how we got here. The elders and I were talking, okay, what would be very bothersome and annoying? Because that's what people love during the summer. And well, you know, and they loved it, so we rolled with it. We can romanticize the rule of Israel's kings, especially that of David and Solomon. So here are my questions. I asked these last week, and these are a lot of the goals, a lot of the questions that we're using in mining the scripture for even more truth. Could we have missed some of the point concerning God ordaining Israel's desire for a king? People make terrible kings and even worse subjects. Not only are we terrible subjects of terrible kings, but we, more often than not, bow our knees to even worse things and serve them as kings. What can the reign of Saul and David and Solomon, kings of Israel, teach us about the reign of Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, who has been promised that throne forever? What does the rule of all Israel's kings tell us about what kind of subjects we are? To kings earthly, to kings tangible, to kings intangible, and to the King eternal. So we did a pretty much of a whirlwind history lesson through Israel, through Abraham, to get us where we were. It began with God forming Israel in his mind, in his imagination. That's where Israel was born, in the will of God. And God called Abram and promised him descendants and land. This promise is foundationally important for the entire series. Genesis 15:16. God said to Abram, "And they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." I read it again because it's important again to see not only the sovereign power of God, but also his loving compassion. Like God could have said, "Hey, Abram, watch this. Fire, lightning, hail, and all the people in Canaan would have been wiped out, and God could have just said, be fruitful, multiply." But God, in his sovereignty and in his grace, took his hand off the peoples of Canaan and said, literally, do whatever the hell you want to do, but I'm bringing my people back in 400 years, and they will be my hand of justice. No one can claim that God was not just in what he determined to do to those people. You shall devote them to complete destruction, God says, when they first arrived, when they came. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. So not only are these people wicked, and so they need to be wiped off the face of the planet, but if you don't do this, they'll oppress you. So do this. Everyone who wants peace with you, they want peace with me. Peace. But everyone who will not bow their knee, who will not be peaceable with you, then wipe them out utterly. God says, believe me, obey me, trust me. And it happened exactly as God had said. When the sins of the Amorites, which is just all the different tribes and kingdoms, when they had reached their fulfillment, God rescued the Hebrews from their 400 years of oppression in Egypt and brought them into the land he promised. The Hebrews then promptly rebelled against God and did not obey the command once they were delivered there. First, they refused even to try to take the land. So God made them drop and give them 40 more years in the desert. And then they came back, and then they conquered a couple, and then either got bored or distracted or worried or From Deuteronomy 1, starting in 30, the Lord your God, who goes before you, will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. And in the wilderness, where you have all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet in spite of this word, you did not believe the Lord your God. God's people did not obey, but they did cry out when the wicked neighbors who weren't supposed to be there oppressed them. So God raised up judges who were like a series of little William Wallaces, that bravehearted all of their oppressors. Then they got lazy, and then they got rebellious, and then they got oppressed, and then they cried out. So Israel ultimately just rejected the rule and the rescue by the judges. So God ordained that there would be prophets. Prophets are ordained of God to be the mouthpiece of God. Priests speak to God on behalf of the people, but prophets speak to the people on behalf of God. And God did a miraculous thing. He raised up a woman named Hannah, blessed her with the desperation of a barren womb. Yes, blessed her with desperation. So she cried out, not in pride or entitlement, but in humility. 1 Samuel 1:20, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. As soon as Samuel was weaned, Hannah kept her word, and Hannah gave Solomon to the Lord, literally. And she sang a song. 1 Samuel 2:9 and 10. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness, for not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Yes, king that didn't even exist yet. What we learned from that is that the prophet comes before the king. And prophets come from the humility of broken cries. Do we lament the wickedness in our land? Do we want the Lord to move? Then the place we should gather and rally is a sanctuary in prayer. God, please be merciful to this land. Be patient with your people. Rise up prophets who will speak to your people what they need to hear. If a people are lost in the desert and need a king, they must first learn to listen to the prophet. There must be a voice crying out in the wilderness, making the path straight for the arrival of the king. What Hannah may not have known, but we know now, is that she was singing the truth, not just about Samuel or Israel or the coming earthly kings of Saul and David and Solomon, but their descendant and ascendant King of Kings, Jesus, the inheritor of the throne established by God for the strength of Saul, for the heart of David, and the majesty of Solomon, but also, and mostly so, the perfection of Christ. So my goal this morning is for us to see that there is only one king strong enough to save us from our true oppressor. There is only one king strong enough to save us from our true oppressor. But now we are ready to step into the establishment of Saul, king of strength. I'm calling Saul the king of strength. But strength to do what? We'll find out. And this will mark Israel's first king, but it is not certainly Israel's first or last rebellion. First king, not first or last rebellion. So as truly as I named this series Kingly, I could have just as easily and accurately titled it Rebelliously. 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting in verse 4. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Saul at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you are old. I just love that. I just kind of wish there was a period there. And your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. I love that even though Samuel was a great and powerful prophet, kind of a crappy dad, And they said, this is not good enough. And he, in his pride, doesn't get puffed up and say, what are you talking about, my boys? You talking about my boys? I tell you, they might be a little rough, right? They might be a little, kind of like, what a waste they are. But they're my sons. What displeased Saul was that they wanted a king. They wanted a king. This thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey, what? The voice of the people and all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king, who shall reign over them. Now, many of us know the story. This is not unfamiliar. They begged for a king. God said to Samuel, tell them they don't want a king and why. And then they say, yeah, where's our king? We want our king. And then the rest of Israel's history with just a few brief interludes. It's like, our kings are terrible. Why did you give us these kings? I picked on one of my children last week, and so it was fun. It was fun. I want to do that again. When Fisher, wave, hi Fisher. When Fisher was tiny, wee lad, about yay, we'd go to First Watch with, Nana, Papa, and old First Watch, I love. New First Watch, I don't know. They're like, they're too big for their little juice cups. I don't know what's going on with them, but you used to be able to get a big giant skillet with like bacon and potatoes and no avocado at all. And then on the side, you have a pancake. Let's make First Watch great again. I would go that route. But during this time, this era, this Pax Romana of First Watch, you could choose between a pancake or a muffin. Fisher chooses muffin. Muffins are big. Fisher doesn't like the size of the muffin. He wants us to cut the muffin. And we say, Fisher, if we cut the muffin will be cut. And Fisher says, cut the muffin. Fisher, you realize when we cut it, you can't uncut it. Cut. Okay, so I got a knife, and I got it on the muffin. We're gonna cut the muffin. It's not gonna be one muffin. It's gonna be 2 half muffins. This muffin will be rent in twain. Two smaller muffins, not one big. Cut it. He says, cut it. Cut the muffin. We cut the muffin. He immediately, you cut my muffin. Boys just helped me preach. There's a few giant ironies in all of this. Israel is begging Samuel to anoint a king to rule over them. But they haven't accepted the rule of the king they do have. But yet they want a new king to obey. Yeah, I know we've never obeyed before. But give us a worse king and we'll obey him. And they're rejecting the rule of their heavenly king, but they still know that it's their heavenly king that they need to grant them an earthly king. So they're disobeying the greater king, asking for a lesser king, but still knowing that the lesser king has to come from the greater king. What did their heavenly king demand of them? Their heavenly king said, destroy the ones who will oppress you. And what are they crying out for? A king to save them from their oppressors. What is it? Is it Psalm 2? Our God sits in the heavens and laughs. I might have just squeezed 2 verses together to make a mega verse. I don't know. The point is, God sits and laughs, and I believe it. Deuteronomy 20, starting in 17. Heavenly King says, you shall devote them to complete destruction. the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods. And so you sin against the Lord your God. And what did they say in their complaint/demand of Samuel and God? They say, now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the other nations. And God's command to wipe out the other nations was so that they wouldn't do things the way the other nations do them. And they're pleading to the God that they disobey to bless them with a king so that they would obey him and that king would save them. The same God that promised to save them if they would only walk in a circle, blow a trumpet. Israel is not supposed to be like all the nations. I can't help but steal some of my thunder coming up, talking about David. We all want to get there so bad. We just love David. The boys in the room just would love David, the sling and the stone. And the Hebrew is like, it was like headshot. And in the Hebrew, it's like, and stuff came out the back of his head. Like, we want to get there with the rocks and the sling. And that's good stuff, right? So you realize, though, that the reason that it was set up that way, you send us a champion and we'll send a champion and they'll fight it out. That was a way the world would wage war. With Goliath standing there, like, Israel, charge. 400 dudes on Goliath, he's dead, right? Cut him into parts, throw the parts back at the other guys. Like, you don't have to, like, Israel's not supposed to be like the other nations. Right? Anyway, the whole setup to the David and Goliath thing is just kind of bogus to begin with and faithless. Thank you, David, for being the one dude with the faith. But you still, in the subtext there, you're like, what are you guys complaining about? What are you guys afraid of? Just don't. What are you waiting? What are you hiding for? Like, we have the Lord our God who has promised to fight for us. We're not supposed to be like the other nations. Israel is not supposed to be like the nations, with kings like the other nations. Exodus 6, starting in 7. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. You'll be my people. I'll be your God. You'll be a kingless people that rules the earth. You'll be so weird. You will confound everyone and live in a peace that passes your understanding. I'll be your God. You won't even need a king. And they reject him. God had just smote the most powerful limp tyrant king in the world, Pharaoh, who is even called a God king, and in doing so proved beyond a shadow that the Lord, he is God, meaning no one else is like him. They even knew the words of God's triumphant theme song, his fight song. Moses sang it by the watery grave of the Egyptians in Exodus 15, 1 through 3, one of my favorite passages in all of the Bible. Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. Amen. They already had a king, all caps. But they didn't want that king. They wanted like a real king. It's not a king we want. We want a fancy guy in a fancy chair with a fancy hat.